Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Machin Leira Online Smicha. The question we would like to address today is is there any issue with a Yid owning a pet store, selling all different types of pets? And is there an issue with a Yid selling pet food? Which obviously some of the pet food might not be kosher. And I would say most of the pet food are not kosher. So what's the connection between these two shilas? It's just like by the pet food. The stress is you're selling a non-kosher food item. Are you allowed to sell a pet which is non-kosher? Is there any issue with selling a non-kosher item? So this is all based on a Mishnah in Masechta Shvius Perek Zayin Mishnah Gimel. The Mishnah says that a Yid is not allowed to do schayra, do business, bepeidah shvius, things that are aser because of shmita, the fruits of shmita you're not allowed to sell, chayros, trumos, nevelos, treifos, shkotzim or amashim. The Mishnah lists off a list of things that even though the Torah doesn't say by all of them the Isser Hana, we know that some of the items that the Torah prohibits are very few. The Torah says it's only not only not allowed to be eaten, you're not allowed to have anah, gain any benefit, profit. But over here the Mishnah lists off nevelas, treifas, shkotzim, remashim. These things the Mishnah says you're not allowed to do schayra. And if you look in Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah Siman Kuf Yud Zayin, the Mechaber makes it even broader. He says, Kol davar sha'asim min haTorah, any item that's prohibited min haTorah, even though clearly it is mutar b'hana, it's only a prohibited item to eat. Imu davar hamiyuchad l'maychol, if it's an item that it's designated for food, asur lasis b'schayra, you're not allowed to sell it, even though it's no isser hana. And amongst the Rishonim, there's a big machlekes Rishonim, if this is a Isser min haTorah to sell it, or it's only a Isser d'Rabbanan. And the reason the Rabbanan made the Isser is to prevent you from eating it, making just a buffer zone. If you have it around and you're doing business with it, you might end up eating it. Ad kedei kach, this halacha is such a strict halacha for those items that you're not allowed to sell. Even if the item is not in your house, even if you have a warehouse that boxes come in and you turn around and sell it, even if it doesn't get into your house, nevertheless it's still usher to do business with it. That's how it's paskin that this halacha is, even if it doesn't, as long as it's an edible food, something that you might end up eating because it's a gzeirus hakasuv. And which gzeirus hakasuv? They compare it to what it says in Parsha Shrotzim, in Chumash Vayikra, Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Hey. It says, Tameim yiu lachem. It should be tamei completely, meaning to say you have to have no interest, no business, no involvement with it. So even though the sheretz is not asher ba'ana, but the Torah says keep your hands away from it, don't deal with it at all. So the Shulchan Aruch goes on to say all other isurim that are asher min haTorah, also you can't. It's just like the Isser Sheratzim, you can't do schayra. But the condition that the Shulchan Aruch says is if it's a davar hu hamiyuchad l'maychol, if it's meant to eat. So I want to stress a couple of chidushim about this statement. Number one, how about if you're selling food that's not the essence of the prohibited food? You're selling a food that has a tam of a tam shel Isser. For us Jews, we know that we follow a rule called tam ki'ikar. If in this mixture, if in these ingredients, there is one of them that's non-kosher, and that one of them is still tasted, it wasn't batel, then the food becomes prohibited. But if it's only one of the ingredients and you're not selling it, then the question becomes, does the rule of Isser Schayra apply there too? So, am I allowed to eat that food? For sure not, because tam is keikar. But does this chumrah of not selling this type of food apply too? So the Achrayim say, and this is brought in Shilas Teshuvas Beis Shleima, Yoreh De'ah Chelik Aleph Siman Kuv Nun, He says the rule of tam ki'ikar does not apply on isur schayra. So eating, you're not allowed to it, but to extend that even on that, you're not allowed to sell, we don't say tam ki'ikar and isur schayra. One point. Another interesting thing you have to know, that this halacha, as mentioned before, is specifically by items that are oimdim la'achila. And it looks like it's structured, so you stay away from eating it. So what if you want to sell a horse, or you want to sell a camel or a donkey or a pet, or any pet that's not kosher? Now these pets that you're selling, or these animals that you're selling, are not oimed la'achila. You sell them for people to do horseback riding, to people to use them for work. So because it's not oimed la'achila, you go basar the minig of the most of the people in the place where it's being sold. If this item is not oimed la'achila, then you're allowed to, even though it's a prohibited. You're allowed to sell it even though it's a prohibited item, a prohibited pet. So too it's brought. The same would apply. The Beis Yosef brings in the name of the Orchos Chaim, and the Lavush says this, to sell any bird or any animal that people raise in their house for pets, to sell a cat or any bird that you have that's not kosher, or any non-kosher bird, any non-kosher fish in an aquarium, or anything like that, because these items are primarily not used for food, they're only used for pets or anything like that, the Isser Schayra does not apply, even though they're obviously usher to eat, but the Isser Schayra is only applied on an item that it's meant to be eaten. And there is actually a discussion also about rabbits. They say that to sell rabbits in Israel, even though some people do eat them, but because most of the people buy and sell rabbits as a bunny rabbit to have in the house, there wouldn't be an Isser Schayra. What's about pet food? Because pet food, since it's designated, most of those foods are designated not to be eaten, they're designated primarily for the animal to eat. So even if it's roi la'achilas adam, because it's designated more for the animal to eat it, there's no chashash that you might eat it, because for most of us it would be ma'us, it would be kind of disgusting. So it's brought in Shilas Shuvas Vayan Yosef, or a Moshe Feinstein, Irgis Moshe Yeridea Chelik Beis Simon Lamed Zayin, that you're allowed to sell this type of pet food, of course, as long as the pet food is not one that's asur ba'ana. If it's pet food that has a mixture or has things that are asur, then the isser of schayra doesn't apply. But if it's asur ba'ana, then even though you're not going to eat it, you're still not allowed to have anah.